I'm Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 330 of the Brilliant Balance podcast, Unlocking Action, Moving from Learning to Doing. That's our subject for today. So welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining me. If you are a longtime listener of the show, I'm so glad you're here today. And if you're brand new, please thank whoever sent you here or whatever algorithm you followed to find your way here. It's always really rewarding to watch the listenership of the show evolving, which, by the way, is a good reminder that if you are a listener of this show, but not yet a subscriber, this is a great time to take care of that little detail so that you never miss an episode. It is my understanding that some people have been unhooked from shows that they follow in various podcast services lately. And I would love for you to make sure you are hooked up officially to the Brilliant Balance show. So here's what you do. Let's say you're listening in Apple Podcasts, where I know a lot of you listen. When you get to this episode, if you just click on the actual show name, or if in the upper right-hand corner, you click those three dots and then the words go to show. Once you get to the show, you will see either a check mark at the top if you already follow/subscribe to the show. If you don't, you will see a little plus sign with the word follow. And all you need to do is click that button and you are then subscribed. The details are a little bit different in various podcast services like Spotify or wherever you may be listening, Stitcher, but I'm sure it's pretty self-explanatory. And in a future episode, I'll walk through the steps for one of the other services. So take just 3 seconds, take care of that little detail. It really does mean a lot. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I want to talk about the difference between learning and doing today. And the reason I want to do this is because I think that we have built a community of people with a propensity to be a learner around here. Probably because I am such a learner. I'm such a student. I'm constantly searching for and assimilating new information. And I think because of that, it's like attracts like. So if you are also a learner who loves amassing ideas and exploring ideas and learning about the latest thing, you are certainly not alone. But I have a little bit of a cautionary tale for us learners in the group today. Because if we are just learning and not applying what we've learned, we don't actually get very far. Right? Learning without the application of those ideas is kind of like if you imagined yourself collecting all of the ingredients for a new recipe. Like you went to a restaurant, you had this great dish, you've never had it before. You found this recipe, you asked the chef how they made it, you started buying all the ingredients, but then you never actually got into the kitchen to make it. Right? The real magic happens when you blend your knowledge that you've acquired with practical experience. And yet we often stop short of crossing that threshold. Why? Because learning is a pursuit that comes with almost no risk, right? It's the safe space to be. The time that we put into learning is essentially all upside, right? There's not a lot of risk. There's not a lot of downside, which makes learning really, really tempting, right? It's like impossible to fail if we're just learning. So we can get stuck there unwittingly. Okay, so let me give you a couple of signs that you might be stuck in a learning cycle and not completing that cycle with practicing what you've learned. One example would be if you are always reading books. Like you finish a book, particularly a nonfiction book, particularly a self-help or personal development book, and you're like on to the next one. Or even better, maybe you have a stack of these that are sort of partially read on your nightstand, right? Or on your coffee table. You know, it's hard to stick with it long enough to even learn what one book has in store for you. You're kind of on to the next thing. Maybe you are a podcast aficionado who listens to lots and lots of podcasts, and you've always heard a new tidbit, but you're not actually doing much. right, with what you've learned. Or maybe you go to a lot of free trainings. Like people offer a free training and you're like, I'm in, I'm going to do that free training. And then you listen and there's something good there, but then you're like signing up for the next free training instead of implementing. Or maybe you have a lot of people that you follow who are really inspiring on Instagram or TikTok. And you're like, okay, they've always got these great little bite-sized ideas for me. And it's really like energizing to hear the idea because then there's no skin in the game. You don't have to do much with it. This is sort of living from an observer's lens, right? You're observing all of this excellence without doing anything with it. Instead of applying what you're learning, you just keep learning more. And the danger here is that you mistake learning for growing. And learning does not equal growing. They're just not the same thing. You have to go do something with what you've learned in order to grow. Otherwise, we're kind of intellectualizing it, right? It's like you know what to do. You can talk about it. You can maybe with great authority talk about it, but you haven't done it. You can't claim that it's something you actually know how to do because you haven't tried it. And all of that intellectualizing doesn't create change, okay? Now, we know that. I'm sure you're listening, head nodding, going, yeah, that's true. But we do it anyhow. We kind of collect ideas as a hobby. And it can make us stop short of actually putting them into practice. And I see this a lot. Again, I work with a community of women who I think would identify as lifelong learners. And honestly, we're really proud of it. I'm really proud of it. I love learning. I'm just a student at heart, and it's so just intrinsically rewarding for me to learn something new. But when we try to assess why we get stuck there at the learning phase and not moving into action, the answers fit into a few buckets. Now, candidly, I tend to be having this conversation when somebody is considering crossing over into coaching, right? They're going to move from, I'm a podcast listener, I've been to free workshop. They're going to move into considering at least being in a two-way relationship through coaching. So we start to confront like what is keeping people stuck at the kind of standing on the outside. But I think this applies in lots of different arenas. That's just my lens on it. You might be wondering, why am I not seeing results? If I know all of this stuff, right? I was with a client who said, I have read every book there is on health and wellness and food and fitness. Like I could write the books at this point, but I'm not doing it. And that's kind of the arena that we're talking about here is why is it that we get stuck sort of standing at the threshold of application, but not crossing over? And I think rarely will we admit that it's because it just feels safe and easy to learn. Like that's not really flying out of people's mouths when you ask this question. But there are a few things that people say that you might recognize in yourself. One of the things that people say is, I just don't have the time, right? Or I don't have the space for this new thing. I've learned about it. It's interesting. I think I might be interested in it. I think it might help me, but I don't have the time to do it, right? Or I don't have the space for it. Or sometimes they'll say, this just isn't the right time, or this isn't the best time. And I'm here to tell you lots and lots of change, lots of progress is stopped in its tracks by this belief. The belief that we don't have enough time or that there just isn't space is like, it's like a big, heavy door that comes down, closing off our ability to make progress. And the reality is that life is already full. All of our lives are full. Yesterday, you spent 24 hours a day doing something, right? You had 24 hours, all of them went somewhere. So our lives are full of existing habits and practices and commitments and appointments and responsibilities. And that fullness, that overcrowdedness is like crowding out the new idea. There's just no room for the new idea to get in there. And so if we think that that's fixed, that crowdedness is a state we can't change, then we have no way to move into applying the things we've learned, right? Starting a new practice, because the new practice will take time. It will require space. But if we can find a sliver of space by clearing it out, right, clearing something else aside or shrinking something back, then we have room to start applying what we've learned. So that's a very important, first step is the creating of space. The second thing that sometimes people say when they're stuck at the starting line, it's like, I'm learning this thing, I'm curious about this, is they just don't know where to start. And this is the problem with having so much input coming at us. All the podcasts, all the TikTok and Instagram people we're following, all the books that get published. There's so much input that we get overwhelmed with information. It's like this big, giant pile of information. Like if you pictured a big pile of laundry and you're like, I don't even know where to start. It's not sorted. It's not organized. I don't have any idea where to start. And so we freeze, right? And honestly, we self-soothe by going to get even more input. It's a total paradox. Instead of saying, I don't need any more input, what I need to do is learn how to take action on what I've already learned, we go think, if I just learn the next thing. So we read the next book on the same topic, right? Or we go to another podcast on the same topic, and we just keep acquiring ideas and insights, but we never translate them into action. So we need a way to tease out what's the starting point? What do we do first in order to build some momentum, right? We need to stop getting ready to start and actually start. Hi, it's Cherylanne. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas I share on this show are things I also can help you implement? If you want me in your corner helping you find more time for what fills you up, go to brilliant-balance.com/schedule and sign up for a free exploratory call. Give yourself this time. You'll be so glad you did. That's the second space. So the first one is we don't have space. The second one is we don't know where to start. And sometimes we can even get started, right? If the idea is exciting enough, if we're really excited about the potential in this idea or what it could do for our life, sometimes we can pick a step one. Maybe we just pick it out of the pile at random. Maybe somebody gave us a starting point. But given that we're cramming that change into an overflowing life, right? And given that we're often insisting on figuring it out for ourselves, cramming it in there on our own, then we hit even bigger issues. And the next bigger issue is that we don't know how to sequence the steps, right? So if we manage to create space and we figure out where to start, we have to know how to sequence the steps. I think if you ask yourself, is there a subject where you are trying to improve your life? Pick a couple at random. Your finances, right? You'd like to be more financially free or secure. Your health. You'd like to feel better, right? Or you'd like to have certain health markers improving. Your relationship, whether it's with your kids or with a partner or with your parents or your friends. Pick any of those areas, right? Professionally in your career, you're like, okay, I want to advance in my career. I want to be a better leader, or I want to start a business. Knowing how to sequence the steps is really important. Those are complex arenas that we might be trying to create change in. So we're reading information or listening to information that's talking about a little sliver of the puzzle, but it's not really giving us a plan. It's not sequencing our steps. So we can end up in a place where we know a lot about what we could do. It's like back to my metaphor at the beginning of acquiring ingredients, but never getting in the kitchen. Now it's like you're standing in a grocery store. There is just produce everywhere and every food item you could imagine. And you're like, if I had one of all of these, what would I even do with it? How would I put this in order? That sequence is a game changer because without that, I think we spin and we swirl. One thing I see a lot these days is people with really elaborate morning routines. Morning routines have taken on a life of their own to the point where we don't even have time to execute the morning routines we've designed because we keep adding things like this is going to solve our problems. And we start to feel like we just can't get to everything. We have all these steps we think we're supposed to be taking but we're trying to take them all at the same time. And that is really a recipe for disaster. Like it collapses in on itself. I think our inner critic goes into overdrive, like, see, here we go again. You're trying something and you'll never finish. And really the through line is we don't have a sequence. We don't have a path to follow that says do this first and then do this second. And then when you've made progress on that, do this third. We're not being handed pacing where things are happening and we've got some breathing room between one step and the next to really lock it in. So we're trying to go too fast or we're trying to do everything at the same time and it's just collapsing on itself. And then the last one that I see is we don't have a system to support and sustain our effort, right? This is where things like accountability, community, support, like expertise, this is where this really comes in. When we're trying to change habits, when we are trying to build persistence, right? Kind of grit and stamina in one direction. What do you do when life happens? What do you do when you start and then the going gets tough because you hit a setback or something happens to someone in your life that requires your attention, right? Too often what happens in that scenario is we quit. We're like, well, I guess this isn't my time. I got 3 days into it, or I got 2 weeks into it, or I got 3 months into it. But I didn't ever really, it's not locked in so solidly that I'll never quit. I'll never give it up. It's kind of like still being established. Or we knew how to do step 1 and then we got to step 2 and we're like, I don't know how to do step 2. So we give up. This not having a system to support and sustain your efforts, right? To really help you stick with it when the going gets tough, when you are trying to get over a setback, right? When you're trying to take a brief detour and come back to the path. This is the other thing that I see tripping people up. So what happens is we're like, well, too hard to start. I can see that coming. So I'll just stay over here in learning mode. Because when we're learning, we don't have to be accountable to anyone. It's like we're getting nothing but extra credit points because we're just learning and learning and learning. We're not ever having to see, do we really know what we're doing? Do we have what it takes to apply it? But real change only happens when you apply, right? When you intentionally create space to do the thing, to adopt the new habit, to put the new practice in place by displacing something else that is less meaningful, that is less effective, that has less of a positive impact on your life than this new thing you're considering, right? Real change happens when you start applying what you've learned. When you find that first step and you're like, okay, I don't know every step of the way, but I'm going to do this thing first. Real change happens when you sequence your steps in a proven order. When you're like, okay, when I finish step 1, I proceed to 2. When I finish 2, I proceed to 3. I think it's Tony Robbins who says success leaves clues. There are almost always proven pathways that you can follow, sequences that work. But knowing what those are and then having the stamina to sustain your effort over time toward those really is how we grow. Okay, there is no other way. And we get so much farther, so much faster when we have people around us as we apply, as we move from learning to doing. It's really lonely to move from learning to doing all on your own. Even if you read the best book on the planet, like imagine the best book you've ever read, the best nonfiction book, the best personal development book. You're like, that was genius. That author does not know the specific circumstances of your life. Like they would have no visibility to the intersection between their words and your life. No podcaster, including me, is really able to see into your life and say, okay, here's how this message applies to you. That requires two-way dialogue. That requires a two-way relationship. So learning the basics, getting the ideas of being like, do I vibe with this? Does this make sense to me? Is this person kind of seeing life the way I see life? That's step one. Step two is, who are you going to let into your life? Who are you going to put in your corner to help you apply? That's the premise behind coaching. I mean, it's the whole reason that's a part of my business at Brilliant Balance. And it's why it works, because we're bringing someone into the process where it's a two-way dialogue, right? It moves from one-way information sharing to two-way. Now we're in an application process. Think about other things in your life that have worked that way, where you went from, I'm standing on the sidelines watching this. I'm kind of thinking, what would it look like to be a part of that? What would it look like? How could I do it? Would my body do that? Would my mind do that? And then you jumped in and said, okay, I'm going to figure this out. Can you think of an example where it was made faster or easier because you had somebody sort of showing you the ropes along the way? That's something that I think as we become adults, we stop giving ourselves permission to ask for, and we start shaming ourselves if we think we need it or would benefit from it, right? We have a culture that fundamentally rewards kind of this rugged individualism of figuring everything out on our own. We can experience a lot of inadequacy if we feel like we, in air quotes, right, need help. And the reality is, I think that we are really robbing ourselves of the shortcut that it can provide across a variety of disciplines, right? If success leaves clues and someone has been there before you and they can shortcut your journey by sharing what they've learned, why wouldn't we give ourselves permission to do that? Unless it's because we want to stay back in the learning phase where it's safe and cozy and warm and we don't have to put any skin in the game, right? Or because our pride is getting in our way and we are staunchly trying to figure everything out ourselves and we keep getting stuck. So if you recognize yourself in either of those patterns, particularly the one where you're stuck in learning and you want to move from learning to doing, you want to put ideas into practice, I'm going to just encourage you to find a way that you can activate that. You can do that with me. You can go to our website and, there's buttons all over the place where you can have a conversation about what it would be like to have support in implementing some of what you've learned, or you can do it with anyone that you trust who can help you to implement. But I want you to give yourself permission to really consider that as a possibility for why you might not be making the progress that you deserve to make. Okay, that is all for today, my friends. We will be back next week with brand new ideas and a brand new episode. Till then, let's be brilliant.
This is the podcastfactory.com.